There are places in America where time forgot to move forward, where prayers echo in empty halls, and the names of the dead are erased not by time, but by intent. Pleasant Hill, Kentucky, was one of those places, and what happened there was not God's will, it was man's design. You weren't supposed to hear this story, not because it was unimportant, but because it was orchestrated by people who understood the power of silence. Over 200 souls vanished from the same place, under the same leadership, over 2 decades, and no one outside ever asked why. Pause. A sound of wind through trees. A church bell rings faintly in the distance. They were told they were chosen. That sacrifice meant salvation. That suffering was purification. But the truth was simpler, darker. They were controlled, broken, forgotten. And if you think this was just a strange cult in a quiet valley, think again. What happened in Pleasant Hill was a prototype, a test, a blueprint for how to erase identity, rewire belief, and build absolute obedience. You're not just watching a story, you're entering the system. They called it Pleasant Hill, but it was neither pleasant nor a hill. It began in 1807, under the guise of religious rebirth. The Second Great Awakening was sweeping Kentucky like wildfire. Thousands were abandoning the world in search of purity. In that chaos, a family emerged. The Richardsons, devout, respected. But their devotion hid something darker, a hunger for control masked as holiness. Elder Samuel Richardson was a man of steel wrapped in scripture, grey eyes, immaculate robes, a voice like thunder in a chapel. He spoke of divine order, but meant obedience. His wife, Sister Martha, smiled gently as she mapped out people's fears, like an architect drafting walls around a soul. They didn't just lead the Pleasant Hill community, they engineered it. Every convert signed over land, inheritance, and name. Celibacy wasn't just a rule, it was a psychological severance. Families were unmade, children reclassified as spiritual wards, no blood, no bonds, only the church. And always, the Richardsons watching. Each night, they met in the great house, calculating movements, assigning punishments, rewiring minds. It wasn't faith they administered, it was programming. And it worked. Too well. By 1810, over 300 members had been molded, utterly compliant, unflinchingly obedient. They weren't building heaven, they were building something far more useful. Obedience is a currency, and the Richardson family became rich beyond gold. Brother Ezekiel, Samuel's eldest, oversaw the fields. His farmers didn't just plow earth, they worked in silence, eyes down, minds blank. From sunup to sundown, Pleasant Hill produced record-breaking yields, but not a single worker kept their own name on the land they toiled. Brother Caleb, the younger son, ran internal order, a quaint term for surveillance. He catalogued every glance, every whispered doubt, every unfinished prayer. Letters were read before they were sent. Confessions were encouraged, then weaponized. Sister Rebecca, the eldest daughter, specialized in breaking women down and building them into disciples. They called it conversion therapy. But the tools weren't holy books. They were shame, sleep deprivation, and whispered manipulations that shattered the psyche. Even the youngest, Sister Patience, could mimic anyone's handwriting within days. She forged letters of farewell, death records, marriage annulments. If someone disappeared, she left a paper trail saying they left in peace, but they never did. To outsiders, Pleasant Hill looked pristine, harmonious, a beacon of discipline and spiritual joy. The fields were orderly, the furniture exquisite, the people quiet. But inside, the soul of Pleasant Hill was mechanical, cold, efficient. It wasn't a church. It was a closed system of total control. Pleasant Hill had no locks, because nothing was ever supposed to leave. Newcomers arrived with trembling hope, wounded souls seeking sanctuary, but hope was a raw material here. and the Richardsons were master craftsmen. The induction process was 6 months long, not for paperwork, for psychological reprogramming. It began with silence. No names, no mirrors, no clocks. Time dissolved, identity blurred. Days blended into hymns, chores, and ritualistic smiles. The phrase, "You are not your past," was repeated like scripture until they forgot what their past even was. Sister Martha led daily counseling, an interrogation cloaked in comfort. She'd press gently at first, learning every trauma, every shame, every unmet need, and then she'd use it. Each convert was paired with a spiritual guide, a Richardson. They lived together, worked together, ate together. Privacy was forbidden, loneliness weaponized. The final test? Isolation. A week in a bare room with only a Bible, a mirror, and a meal per day. If they broke, if they cried, screamed, begged, they were ready. But if they resisted, they vanished. You won't find their names, not in the record books, not in the cemetery. Pleasant Hill didn't exile dissidents, it erased them. This was no community, it was a refinery. And the product was submission. By 1814, Pleasant Hill wasn't a community, it was a stage, and the Richardson family were its unseen directors. To outsiders, it was a marvel. Pristine buildings, productive farms, smiling faces, even government officials praised it as a model of divine order. But beneath that order was fear. Every action, every glance, every spoken word was monitored. Brother Caleb maintained a secret network of informants, trusted members trained to eavesdrop, record, and report. They called them watchers. You might be praying beside your betrayer and never know it. Children were separated from parents early. Raised in dormitories under Sister Rebecca's care, they were taught one truth: the family is divine, the family is law. Dissent wasn't punished, it was rewritten. When Sister Lydia tried to flee, her name was removed from all records, her belongings burned. The next Sunday, she was declared a demon in human skin, and the children were made to chant her exorcism. She'd lived there 12 years, loved, worked, prayed. Now she didn't exist. And the others? They nodded, they clapped, they sang, because deep down, they knew. The moment you speak your truth in Pleasant Hill is the moment you disappear. But the world outside was beginning to whisper. In 1815, a traveling Baptist preacher named Elias Harlan arrived at Pleasant Hill. He came with good intentions, curiosity, admiration, and a journal. Elias had heard tales of Pleasant Hill's purity and harmony, but within hours he sensed something was off. Too quiet, too controlled. He wasn't allowed to speak privately with any member. All conversations were escorted by Brother Caleb or Sister Martha. Meals were pleasant but rehearsed. Every answer sounded memorized. The children never smiled with their eyes. He stayed 3 days. On the 4th, he left, faster than anyone expected. That journal, it would vanish from public knowledge for nearly 200 years. But in it, Elias described something that chilled even seasoned historians when it was uncovered. On his final night, he wrote, "At the 12th hour, I saw lanterns in the orchard, figures in robes, a procession, no chanting, only silence. One carried what looked like a child, limp, wrapped in white. They entered the old smokehouse. Minutes later, smoke rose, not from wood, but something wrong. I dared not intervene. I felt watched, even then." He left a final line, barely legible under smudged ink. "This is not faith. It is control dressed as holiness." And no one would believe him, until it was too late. By 1818, the number of Pleasant Hill members who had simply left the community stood at 29. That's what the Richardsons claimed anyway. They had, according to official statements, relapsed into worldliness. But no one ever saw them again, not in Harrodsburg, not in Lexington, not even on distant family farms. No letters, no sightings. Nothing. When Sister Mary Caldwell dared to ask what became of Sister Abigail, her dormitory friend who had grown withdrawn and frightened in her final weeks, she was told, "She found her way back to the world. We must let her go, for her path is no longer ours." But Sister Mary had seen Abigail's shoes, still under her bunk, untouched. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She stepped quietly into the hallway and followed a dim light toward the cellar. There, muffled sobs, a voice whispering prayers, not in worship but in fear. She turned a corner. The light vanished. Silence. 2 hands gripped her shoulders. It was Sister Rebecca. "Curiosity is a fire," she whispered. "Left unchecked, it burns through faith. Shall we pray, Sister Mary?" The next morning, Mary was assigned to garden duty, alone, far from others. She never spoke of it again. But that same week, 3 more names quietly vanished from the records. By 1822, retreats had become routine. To outsiders, these were spiritual sabbaticals, intense periods of prayer, silence, and divine renewal. But to those inside Pleasant Hill, the word had taken on a darker tone. A retreat meant one thing: you were being watched. Each retreat cabin was built on land with no direct paths, just dense trees, overgrown brush, and silence. They were far enough away that no screams could carry. Once inside, a member would be assigned fasting, repetitive prayer, and total isolation. No books, no conversation, just their own unraveling mind, and a visitor every night. Brother Caleb would arrive before dusk, carrying a black ledger. He asked no questions. He simply sat, watched, and waited. Some retreated for 3 days, some for 30. One brother, Nathaniel Ross, was sent for spiritual rebellion after writing a letter to his sister outside the community. He never returned. The Richardsons said he chose the road of worldly corruption, but Sister Hannah, who managed the food logs, noticed something strange. Cabin number 4, where Nathaniel had stayed, stopped receiving meals 3 days before he was declared missing. No one ever used cabin number 4 again. It remained locked, its windows boarded, its name scratched from all records. But secrets don't stay buried forever. In the winter of 1824, a group of young converts, restless, curious, and naive, stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see. During a sanctioned hunting trip led by Brother Caleb, a storm forced the group to seek shelter. They veered off the marked paths and found an old trail that twisted into the forest. That's when they saw it. Cabin number 4. Its wooden frame had rotted along the edges, the shutters nailed shut, the door chained from the outside like a prison. One of the boys, Levi Maddox, swore he heard scratching from inside. The group was hurried back before they could investigate further. That night, Levi disappeared. His parents, both longtime Pleasant Hill members, were told he had received a divine calling and left for a mission in Indiana. But no letters ever came, no trace, no trail, just a grave silence. The next morning, cabin number 4 was gone, burned to ash in a controlled spiritual cleansing. Witnesses recall Brother Isaiah hauling buckets of water after the fact, but the fire had already consumed everything. When asked, Sister Martha simply said, "God cleans what man cannot." But those boys, they never slept right again. What followed was a wave of vanishing so precisely timed, so ritualistically clean, that even the most skeptical outsiders couldn't explain them. By 1825, 12 members had disappeared in less than 8 months. Each case followed a pattern. First, a spiritual crisis. Then isolation in the retreat cabins. Then, silence. No funerals, no burials, no bodies. Each was explained away with phrases like, "They found higher purpose," or The Lord called them elsewhere. But families who came to inquire were met with cold hospitality, redirected, and sometimes never heard from again. Some say the ground behind the seed house began to shift oddly in the springtime, soft mounds rising after the rain, only to be flattened the next day. Brother Ezekiel had dismissed it as land settling, but Sister Mary Caldwell, she kept records. She mapped every vanishing, and every time, the ground rose. She confided in only one outsider, Inspector Alton Reed, who visited Pleasant Hill in 1833. He never filed a report. He died in a house fire 2 months later. The Richardson family had created something deeper than a cult. They had engineered a closed-loop system of disappearance, and no one on the outside wanted to see it. There is a name whispered in Kentucky taverns and handed down in local legends, the Hollow Doctrine. Never written, never preached from the pulpit, it was a secret theological framework created by Samuel and Martha Richardson, a belief that only through complete ego death could the soul transcend. But ego death for them meant annihilation. The doctrine taught that some souls were vessels, meant to be emptied completely so others could ascend. It justified the disappearances, it rationalized the retreats, it gave divine permission for obliteration. Sister Rebecca reportedly called it spiritual composting, a way to recycle broken souls into energy for the chosen. Former members who escaped, few as they were, spoke of whispered rituals held at night in the seed barn, chants in an unknown tongue, and the use of herbal sedatives that left participants unable to move, but fully aware. They spoke of being made to watch the disappearances, of being told, "This is what faith requires." And yet, local law enforcement never intervened. Why? Because Brother Nathan had bought their silence with favors, donations, and fear. He once told a sheriff, "Interfere, and your church will burn with its congregation locked inside." The Hollow Doctrine wasn't religion. It was weaponized belief. By the early 1830s, the disappearances had become routine, monthly, then weekly. Members didn't question it anymore. They prayed harder. They worked longer. They obeyed faster. The indoctrination was complete. But darkness has limits, and sometimes it turns inward. It began with Sister Mary Caldwell, the young woman who noticed the almond scent the night Brother Thomas died. She had grown up inside Pleasant Hill, but her memory was sharp, and the cracks, now too many, could no longer be ignored. She started keeping secret journals, hidden inside a broken floorboard in the women's dormitory. She documented every disappearance, every name, every retreat that turned into an empty bed. She tracked Sister Martha's schedule, noted the ingredients used by Hannah Collins, recorded the strange chants drifting from the seed barn at midnight. Her writing shifted from fear to fury. Then came the night she followed Brother Caleb. It was raining. She kept her distance, no lantern. He carried something over his shoulder, a sack sagging at the ends. Mary watched him approach a collapsed well on the outskirts of the orchard. She heard a splash. That night, her journal ended with one line. "This place is a graveyard wearing a choir robe." The next day, Mary vanished too. The official record states, Sister Mary Caldwell left Pleasant Hill to care for a sick aunt in Ohio. But there was no aunt, no travel papers, no witness. What there was, however, was silence, and something far worse, compliance. The Richardson family increased surveillance. Brother Caleb began random dormitory inspections. Sister Rebecca introduced midnight confession sessions where members were pulled from bed and interrogated under the guise of spiritual purity. The phrase spiritual rot became a common accusation, followed by immediate reassignment to the retreat cabins. Soon those cabins, once isolated sanctuaries, were bricked shut from the inside. No one returned from them. A visiting inspector from Ohio named Elias Morland arrived in 1833. Officially, he was there to study communal agriculture. Unofficially, he had received a letter, unsigned, but written in Sister Mary's distinct hand. The inspector never reported back to his office. But 1 week later, a single page appeared in the mailroom of a Lexington post office. It was scorched at the edges and smelled faintly of lye. The ink was smeared, but one sentence was clear. The roots of Pleasant Hill do not grow into the earth. They grow into us. That was the last known communication from inside. Months later, Pleasant Hill was empty. When state officials finally arrived in 1834, they expected resistance. What they found was abandonment. Quiet, total, chilling. Chairs still pulled out from dinner tables, candles half melted, tools laid neatly beside unfinished work, beds made with military precision. But not a soul in sight. The building stood pristine, but wrong, like a stage set after the actors have vanished. No signs of struggle, no luggage taken, just absence. The investigation was brief and shallow. Governor Elias McHenry, a known recipient of Richardson family donations, ordered all inquiries sealed. The official report declared Pleasant Hill a failed religious experiment, abandoned voluntarily due to spiritual fatigue. But the whispers never stopped. Locals spoke of nighttime chants in the woods, of animals refusing to graze near the property, of travelers who spent a single night in the ruins and returned mute. In 1912, a group of historians tried to open one of the bricked retreat cabins. The walls were thicker than expected, the air sour. Inside, a single chair, chains bolted to the floor, and a message carved deep into the stone: God does not dwell here anymore. Whatever Pleasant Hill was, it did not die. It shed its skin and became legend. But legends, when traced, often reveal bones. In 1956, during highway expansion through Mercer County, construction crews unearthed something deep beneath what old maps confirmed was once Pleasant Hill's outer orchard. A chamber, sealed in limestone, dry, preserved, undisturbed for over a century. Inside, they found 12 skeletons, small, malformed, skulls elongated, jaws wired shut. Alongside them, pages wrapped in waxed cloth, journals, names, dates, confessions. Not in English, not even in Shaker script. But a cipher, a fusion of Hebrew, Latin, and something far older. The University of Kentucky took custody. 2 professors died in car accidents within months of beginning translation. A third vanished during a research trip to Prague. The journals were never published. Still, fragments leaked, mentions of the seed of perfect obedience, of blood unity and the 400-fold covenant, of something the Richardsons called the vessel ritual, an ancient rite practiced not for salvation but preservation. Preservation of what? A lineage, a consciousness, a force that demanded not worship, but continuity. Pleasant Hill was not a cult. It was not a mistake. It was a mechanism. A vault, a blueprint for control so total it transcended time. And now, we must ask, what if it was never truly buried? Because in the silence that followed Pleasant Hill's collapse, something shifted. In 1981, a group of investors quietly purchased 200 acres near the original site. They claimed it was for historical preservation, but construction permits listed only one structure, a subterranean archival facility. No public access, no photos, no digital records. By 1990, former residents of nearby Harrodsburg reported strange occurrences: chanting deep in the woods, lights beneath the soil, and a man with piercing grey eyes visiting homes, asking questions about lineage. Then came the disappearances. Since 2005, over 24 individuals, all descendants of early Pleasant Hill members, have vanished. Most had recently begun genealogical research. Authorities cite unrelated circumstances. But the patterns are undeniable. And now, with records sealed, witnesses silenced, and algorithms burying the truth, it falls to us. To remember, to resist, to reclaim what they've hidden beneath layers of piety, progress, and polite silence. If you've come this far, if you feel the weight of this knowledge settling behind your eyes, comment twice below. I remember the orchard. Let the system know you're awake. Let the others find you. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. And the final chapter hasn't been written yet,